Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this special off-season Kingston Writers Fest event in celebration of Giving Tuesday. My name is Ara McCauley, and I'm the artistic director for the festival. And I'm pleased to present Spinning a Good Yarn, a cross-country road trip with Sylvia Olsen. I know many of you have been patiently waiting for us to present this since the festival, and we're very pleased to have Sylvia with us tonight. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the festival customarily takes place and where I am tonight is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We gratefully acknowledge these Indigenous nations for their ongoing guardianship of this land. We agree to peaceably share in responsibility for stewardship of this land, its waters, and all of its biodiversity. All those who come to live and work here are responsible for honoring these relationships in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I'd like to take a moment to thank the many organizations and individuals who support the festival year-round. Thank you to you, our generous donors and audience members. And I also want to thank IB Type Inc., who is the event sponsor for tonight. I'll introduce our author in just a moment, but first some housekeeping. Since we cannot gather in person, we have set up our Zoom so that everyone can be seen on screen and knit along with your fellow attendees. If you would prefer to watch in private, you can simply turn off your video by clicking the option on the bottom left of your screen. You will be muted during the event, but feel free to say hi in the chat. This event is an hour long and includes a question and answer period. You're welcome to enter questions in the chat at any time during the event, or you can raise your hand at the end of the event and we can unmute you so you can ask your questions. If you'd like to support Sylvia by picking up a copy of her wonderful book, our official bookseller Novel Idea has copies available to purchase in store, by phone, or online. And now I'm delighted to introduce this event's presenter, Sylvia Olsen. Sylvia is an adult educator and facilitator specializing in First Nations housing. She's the author of over 20 books for adults and children, including Working with Wool, a Coast Salish Legacy, and The Cowichan Sweater, which was awarded the Lieutenant Governor General's Medal for Historical Writing. She married into the Tsartlip First Nation near Victoria, BC, where she lived for 35 years and developed relationships with the Coast Salish knitters through her family's sweater shop. Unravelling Canada and Knitting Odyssey, her cross-cultural road trip, explores questions of identity, influence, authenticity, and colonization. Author Lona Crozier says, I love this book for what it says about the artisans of the past and the present, for what it says about what gets passed on from family to family and between different cultures, for what it says about our country and the people who inhabit it. This book knits us together not only with strands of wool, but with compassion, intelligence, caring, and storytelling of the most appealing kind. Please welcome Sylvia Olsen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ara. And I'm really happy to be here with you in Kingston, sort of. Where I am is just out of Victoria, BC, about 20 minutes north of Victoria, BC, on the Saanich Peninsula. I'm in the WSÁNEĆ territory, and that is the land of my children. And the WSÁNEĆ territory is, as my children say, it is the best place in the world. And it's funny because we kind of laugh at the thought that the place that you are at is the best place in the world. But it's how it should be, right? Wherever you are, and wherever you have a home should be seen as the best place in the world. So that's how we look at this place here. It's the land of the Coast Salish people, the WSÁNEĆ people, but these are the people of the Salish Sea. So when you hear about First Nations people saying no more tankers in the Salish Sea, no more pollution in the Salish Sea, there's a very active group of people protecting the Salish Sea, which surrounds the tip of Victoria, BC. So you probably all know exactly where that is, but that's the land and the sea of the Salish people. And as Ara said, I married into this group when I was 17 and lived in the First Nation for 35 years, raising children and grandchildren, and now I live just up the road. So my life has been a cross-cultural, epic cross-cultural experience. It's been a immersion because I was 17 when I moved there. So I had a pretty intense immersion experience of Coast Salish life. Um, I kid you not, and I'm not overestimating it when I say that people often say, "What was that like?" And we can talk about what that's like, but in truth, it was what it was because of knitting. Truly, I owe my life and what I got from living in a First Nation to the Coast Salish knitters. Um, and so I've written lots about it. I've written lots of blogs about it, and it's just part of my story. And this book that I'm here talking about emerges from that same experience. But real quick, when I was 17 and my husband said, "We're going to live on the reserve," which meant nothing to me really, because I didn't know much more about, it was 1972. Um, and I didn't know much about reserves any more than any other little white girl like me. So living on the reserve, off the reserve, good. I'm, with the man I love. Let's live on the reserve. Um, it was a bit of a shock. It wasn't quite that. I couldn't be quite that glib after I moved there. But in truth, what I saw when I moved there, what my eyes saw when I moved there, besides what we all probably can imagine what reserves were like in 1972, and they're not like that anymore. They really are not like they were in 1972. And for that, we can be really happy. But what I saw in 1972 was wool everywhere. And I mean everywhere. Every single house had wool fleece hanging in the back, in the sides, on the porch, on the fence posts, on the ground. And that to me, because I was, this was 1972, remember? And a whole bunch of us that look sort of like me, actually, a lot of you are a lot younger than me. But in 1972, we were all handy, right? We were all doing stuff with our hands, wall hangings and macrame, and you have it. I was one of those for sure. And when I saw every house dripping with fleece, I was excited because I thought, well, this is, and I knew I had a couch and sweater just like everybody else did in those days. So I knew they came from there, but I had no idea the industry behind the Coast Salish knitters. I really didn't. And I learned it. Now, did people like me moving on to the reserve? No, 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 no. Did people like my husband in 1972 living off the reserve? No, no. Canada did not like Indians living in their neighborhoods. When we first got married, we moved into Sydney, a little town. It was not a good place for my husband to live. So we're going to live on the reserve made sense to me. Yeah, this isn't a nice place for you to live. So we'll live there. Well, it wasn't really a very friendly place for me to live either. So, but what was friendly, well, first of all, my mother-in-law lived right next door to me, to us. And between our houses was a great big pit with a great big fire. It was a big fire pit with a great big pot, as you can imagine. And in it, she washed her wool. Was she happy that her son married a white woman? Not at all. She was not at all friendly to me. She was not at all happy that I was living behind her. But I swear, and she's passed on now, and she is one of the most important people in my life. But it was probably not more than a few weeks after I moved into that little trailer behind her house before I was making wool with her. And I always say, I'm not sure what her other daughter-in-laws think now, but most of them aren't her daughter-in-laws anymore. So I became her very favorite, white and all, daughter-in-law, because we made wool and we knit and we shared our love for knitting from that day until she was 93 when she passed away. So so it wasn't just her though. I lived on the reserve, and my husband and I set up this little shop where we bought and sold sweaters and sold wool, and I put zippers in and I repaired them. So it was the knitters. It was the knitters that made me in those days. It was the knitters that made my life there wonderful, beside the pieces that were very difficult. It was these knitters that just became my people, and it was wonderful. And so that kind of overarched everything else that was going on there. And I stayed there, like I said, for 35 years, and then I have moved off since. So that's my background of who I am. My work is neither knitting nor writing. My work is in First Nations housing, for which I am now retiring piece by piece. I've had a long career in on reserve housing, and you can read some of that on my blog. There's pieces that I've written. I did my PhD in the history of on reserve housing programs from government programs. So that's actually what I've done in my life. Knitting and writing are my hobbies that I spend a lot of time doing and that I'm very obsessed with. So it sort of feels like I have 3 careers, but I don't. I'm going to, I'm going to go right into, I have these slides, and I'm going to take you on the road trip that this book is all about. And then we'll understand why the book was written. And you'll have now gone on a knitting road trip with me once we're done. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my screen. And how come I can't see it? We can't see it, can we? Why are we looking at Zoom? Can I try that again? Ara, can you see that I'm having a little bit of trouble? Why am I not able to get?
When you share, you might have, oh, there you go.
There it is. Okay, thanks. I'm always in a panic. I knit, I do housing, but what I don't do is technology. Just seriously, I don't. So when something doesn't work, I always panic, but there we are. I think I fixed it. There. So hello again. This book has been written about a road trip that my husband, then my boyfriend, took in 2015. This is us. This is one of my illustrators, did this little cartoon for us. We went from Victoria to Newfoundland, and there is me and Tex McLeod, who was the driver, was the roadie. And why we did this is because I'd written a book called Knitting Stories, and it's essays. And I'm going to get rid of that. I don't know whether you can see it, but it's kind of, and it has 7 knitting patterns in it. And my publisher said, let's do a road trip kind of launch, which, yeah, let's do that. You know, maybe Vancouver, maybe into the interior of BC. And so that's how it started. And then we said, well, I'm a storyteller. Let's get people to come and bring their knitting stories. Yeah, that sounds like fun. And then, you know what, if we're going to be with a whole lot of knitters, we should really I should do a little workshop. So what this turned into being from a book launch, it turned into being a 6-week cross Canada road trip, 40 cities, 60 about 60 workshops, almost 1,000 people. Yeah, an insane road trip, my knitting road trip. Hold on, come on, okay. That's the hat. If any of you were in one of the workshops, you would have made a hat like that or got close to it. It's not unique. Like I said, there's probably 1,000, maybe 1,200 of those hats across the country. So we did that little workshop. And the story that I told was this story, the Working with Wool story, which is the history of Coast Salish knitters, which I wrote for my master's thesis. And the reason I wrote it for my master's thesis is that I lived with Coast Salish knitters since 1972. And well, I'm going to tell you the story. And I don't know how this resonates these days, but I was doing my master's thesis and I'm an oral historian, so I needed to do some interviews. And so I asked Cecilia Smith, one of the knitters, let's go for lunch, Cecilia, and tell me all the stuff that you always have told me anyway over the years that I already know, but I need to do it formally for university. Okay, that's wonderful. So we went to Smitty's. I don't know if you have Smitty's back there, and she had meatloaf, and Cecilia and I, she was now an older woman by then, had this wonderful lunch. And she just went on and on and on about knitting and all the things that she thought. And it was just awesome. And then she stopped and she's looking at me and she says, wow, Sylvia, us Coast Salish knitters were sure hard workers, weren't we? And then she started to laugh. And she says, you and me might be the only people in the world that know we are. And that's when I realized that knitting has always been diminished. It's always diminished. It's not quite as diminished now as it was, but that women knit was just invisible. It just wasn't even considered important whatsoever. This would have been in the early 90s. And yet I knew, and Cecilia knew, and everybody else that has anything to do with Coast Salish knitting knows that you wouldn't have eaten if your mother didn't knit. That's how important it was. It was an industry, a huge industry, and it became BC's most important and probably only icon. And it's all these things, but it was knitting and it was women, and who cared? So that's why I did this. And that was my research, but it was also my life. And that's how big it was out this way. That's in Duncan, and that would have been in the 50s. And that was one of many stores selling this thing called a Cowichan sweater. I'm not even sure by the 50s if it was called a Cowichan sweater yet. They were called Indian sweaters, but they became Cowichan sweaters probably in the 70s or 80s, maybe earlier than that. And this is why I'm there, is that's my ex-husband. And that's my son, and that's my daughter, and that's always what they looked like. And those sweaters were actually knit by Cecilia Smith. And so our life was immersed in this knitting. There's glamorous me when I was younger. How about that, hey? But the reason this is here is because that was one of the last sweaters that my mother-in-law, Laura Olsen, knit. And I took that on the road as part of my story to explain that Canada has a knitting thing, a big, big knitting thing. And that's why I went on the road and decided to go right across Canada. I was like, okay, what else is there? Like, I know about this kind of knitting. This is Canadians knitting, but what else is out there? So I brought my story and I listened to, like I said, 800 or 900 stories across the country. This is a famous sweater, and I was meeting with knitters, so I talked about how the sweater was constructed. These are some of the construction points. And I talked about this important color work that the way that Coast Salish women do color work. Not unique. They didn't invent it, but this is what their color work looks like. And this is that little girl, Joni. This is this little girl about 10 years ago, because the little blonde girl who is her daughter, and looks much more like her grandmother than her mother, but anyway, is now about 18. But this is actually the epitome of this is the expression of our family, is that knitting's the thing we do and we pass it down. So on the road, it was interesting because it turned into a bit of a kind of like antique roadshow. I put out the message before I left: bring your old sweaters. I want to see the oldest sweater in the country. Turned out to be that everybody brought a sweater and wanted to know something about the sweater. This is in Winnipeg. Just going to take you on the road. When you live where I live, this is how you start a road trip. You get on the ferry. And this is what it looked like all across the country. Honestly, yarn shop after yarn shop after yarn shop, filled to their brim, once, twice, 3 times. I was floored. I could not believe the interest in this in this road trip. This is in Vancouver, and I think they filled this little shop up about 3 times. So people brought their sweaters and wanted to know about their sweaters. And this extremely elegant, beautiful woman brought this very strange sweater, very, very strange sweater to me, to say, you know, here's my sweater. Is this a Cowichan sweater? Is this, what kind of wool is this? And that's what I did with all kinds of sweaters like this. There we are in Vernon, and just one after the other. That's my beautiful boyfriend, who is now my husband, and he's Tex, and he took all the pictures. Canada has 3 treasures, and they are 3 woolen mills that create yarn, very Canadian yarn. And this one is in Carstairs, Alberta, and it is using turn of the century Industrial Revolution equipment, and it's creating as raw and as environmentally friendly wool as I think you can get, other than small producers that do it completely sustainably. This is Maddie, and this is in Carstairs, Alberta. And I just wanted to say to one thing that we found is that knitting's not going anywhere. This business used to belong to her mother. Maddie quit her PhD in something like physics to run the woolen mill. And there's 3 of them. This one in New Brunswick, and one in Prince Edward Island. And the next generation is taking over all of them, which is kind of cool. Winnipeg. This was there was a lot of press, if you can believe it. Here we're going on a knitting road trip, and we ran into press all over the place. And this is a guy that writes for the Winnipeg Free Press, and he brought his sweater, and he wrote a couple of articles about us, which was also quite amazing. I was amazed on all fronts going across. I'm going to show you, we had stories all across the country, and here's just one that I'm going to tell you about. Ontario's as big as Canada. We all know that. And it's like, oh my gosh, okay, we're going to cross the border and we're going to spend the next however long in Ontario. I wanted to get down your way, right? And we had this phone call from these people from Sioux Lookout. And my publisher phoned and said, can you fit Sioux Lookout into no, I said, no, we are overbooked. No, Sioux Lookout says they have a really, really important story, and they really want you to come. Sioux Lookout is north of Kenora. I guess you are Ontario people, so you probably know where Sioux Lookout is. Sioux Lookout's the hub for 27 First Nations in the north that my husband knows really well because he's worked up there a lot. But what Sioux Lookout wanted to tell us was about this elderly woman down in the left corner, and her name was Pat Saunders. And she she was an old Sioux Lookout resident. And Sioux Lookout had terrible First Nations and non-First Nations relationships. And she didn't like that. And she said all the mothers would come down to Sioux Lookout and have their babies. They'd leave their families at home and there would be nobody in Sioux Lookout looking out for them. And she said, so she took it upon herself years and years and years ago that she would go and visit every mother that was having a baby in Sioux Lookout. And she knit them a baby hat. And now it's the third generation of babies coming, birthing their babies and getting hats from the Sioux Lookout knitters. Pat has now passed on, but they now knit 500 hats a year, and every baby that is born in Sioux Lookout, stillborn, premature, normal birth, they all get a Sioux Lookout hat. And I had to knit some, so those were mine that I left with the babies. As I told you, I said, let's find the oldest sweater in the country. And people took that to mean, because of my knitting history, that was the oldest Cowichan sweater. That's okay, that's what showed up. And I heard so many sweater stories. This one, they called me before and said, you have to come and visit our sweater. We're in Port Perry, Ontario. And this sweater was our grandfather's, and it was the only thing that he retained when all his property was expropriated and he was sent to the Japanese internment camps. You must come and see this sweater. So that was a pretty cool story. We were very excited, and off we went to see this sweater. But when we were in Calgary, I was telling people, I'm going to meet this sweater. I'm going to meet this sweater in Port Perry. And this is the story of this sweater, and I can't wait to meet it. And this woman said, hold on, I just got to go phone my husband. And 20 minutes later, the husband shows up with this sweater. And she says, this is my grandfather's sweater. And this is the thing he had on his back when he got taken to the internment camp. And it's the only thing we have that's left from my grandfather before the internment camps. Shocking. 2 sweaters with the same story. This might have vied for the oldest sweater. Those sweaters were 30, 40 sweaters. This sweater was 2. The woman who brought this sweater says, I bought this sweater in 1960, secondhand, and it was already worn to shreds. And a Cowichan sweater doesn't wear out that early. I'm thinking that sweater must have been 20 or 30 years old before she got it. So those are the 3 oldest sweaters, and they all have pretty cool stories. And then we had people brought us every kind of sweater. Mary Maxim here on the bottom with the boys, Cowichan sweater at the top with a horse for the father. Just about finished this. I had to go, when you knit with the Coast Salish knitters in the West Coast, you have to go to the East Coast, because there are 2 knitting traditions in this country. One, Coast Salish, and the other, the Nonian knitters from Newfoundland. And the Nonian knitters in Newfoundland also knit for their lives. But they knit for their health system in the 1930s. Where there was no health system in the Newfoundland, they knit, sold their knitting, and got nurses to come to their little outports. And I have always dreamt of going and seeing this, and I got to. And here they are. This is Nonian knitters. And they ship this wool out to the women, elderly women who are still out in these little tiny wee outports, and they knit. There's one. Imagine. And what was really fun is the woman here, Joanne, was a First Nations woman, so she was very excited to see the kind of full circle. Full circle in our house. This is that daughter of mine, Joni, the little girl in the sweater, the one that was teaching her blonde haired daughter how to knit. Joni has studied weaving, Coast Salish clothing, and she designed this for an art show where she knit what she saw in the archives at one point, which would have been woven in the day, but she created this tunic. Joni is opening a shop. She's run it for years, but it's closed down because she actually tore the shop down. It's called Salish Fusion. She's building it right now as part of her new house that she's building. And this is the inheritor of the knitting obsession in our family. This is what she makes. She makes this on a knitting machine. So when she says Salish Fusion, she's fusing traditional knitting with knitting machines and different kinds of wools. It's one of her cousins. We do a lot of felting in Salish Fusion. These are some felted hats or fulled hats, as you felters would let me know. And bags. And rugs. And rugs. And wall hangings, specifically for people when they're on Zoom, so that there's something more interesting than a white wall behind them. And pillows. And that's my tour. That's what we're doing. That's me. And I am now, that was good. That was short. I shortened it up as I could have gone on with that for hours, but I didn't. So I'm happy about that. I didn't talk about writing this book, so I will really briefly. I came back from that road trip and I was actually exhausted, like more than exhausted, just like, okay, no more. I just got to get home. Oh my gosh, 6 weeks. And I'm a storyteller, as I said, but I didn't see the story in it. There was the muchness of it was just too much to see the story. I didn't see a story. And I did not go on that road trip to write about it. That was not it. It was to take the previous book on the road. But about a year after I got home, I started thinking about the road trip. And I started thinking about it from the perspective of this white woman, or to start with, this actually little white girl, and my relationship with my country that emerged from living on a First Nation. And I had an ambivalent relationship with Canada. I never could, fly a Canadian flag. You live on a First Nation and look out your kitchen window at a First Nation, and really what you say is, what the hell, Canada? How could this possibly occur? And that's what came for me in 1972, and that's what stuck with me all my life. So, I mean, I know Canada is as good as there is in the world. I traveled a lot, and so I'm not demeaning my country, but you can't get all excited about it living on a First Nation. So here I am, this British Columbian that's kind of like, Canada, you really got to grow yourself up, because this is not okay. And when I came back from the road trip, I started thinking about that, and I started thinking about what Canada meant in terms of my relationship with it. So this book is two things. It's knitting stories, lots of little knitting anecdotes. And it is Canada through the eyes of somebody struggling. But it's interesting because when I finally wrote this book, I was much less ambivalent than I was before. And maybe it's because I'm old now, but I was much more patient with my country than I was to begin with. And I write it from that point of view, is that I'm much more patient. I was very impatient though before. So I am much more patient with Canada. But it came out right when everything exploded in terms of Black Lives Matter as in residential schools. But I'm still more patient with my country. In fact, I'm more patient with it now than I ever have been, because where we live here in First Nations territory, never before has the conversation been as acute, been as clear, been as persistent, been as critical as it is now. And in this book, I think I ended up with, it's time for Canada to grow itself up. It really is. Stop being this, we're all good guys. For one thing, it's boring. For another thing, it's a lie. And for another thing, it's juvenile. So it's time to see yourself, Canada, for all your warts and all your nasty histories and all your goodnesses. And that's what's happening in this book for me. And I'm not a super awesome optimist that everything's going to be cured, but it is changing. It is changing. The life for my children is nothing like it was for the life of their father. Nothing like it. So yeah, so I am not as ambivalent. I am slightly optimistic, which shocks the heck out of me. And but it's the truth. It's the truth. I'm going to read before because I think we have still more than 20 minutes. So I'm going to read something very short here. And it's the poem that I wrote in the book. I was looking forward to getting to Winnipeg, because Winnipeg for me has always been this conflicted city. It is the place where many immigrants came. It's the place where the Métis race basically began. It's a tragic place and an exciting place to be First Nations. And so for me, Winnipeg, and I've worked in Winnipeg a lot with First Nations housing. I wanted to see Winnipeg and see it through these eyes of mine traveling across the country. And here's what I wrote when I was in Winnipeg. I don't know if any of you have been to the Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg. It's just this crazy, fabulous place. It's also extremely conflicted, all kinds of conflict in the city about it. But I thought when I was there, I thought, yeah, actually it should be. It should be a place of conflict because the topic is conflicted. So that this place is a place of all kinds of tensions makes sense to me. And it was kind of transportative for me. So I'm in the Museum of Human Rights, and it has some pretty astounding displays there. And this is called the Ode to the Museum of Human Rights. Red dresses hang in a misty forest diorama. A little girl presses her nose against the glass. Mummy, what does it mean? The dresses remind us that there are girls who have never been found. Trees shimmer to the pulse of the paddles of ancient, mighty mixed bloods, hauling goods to deep forest places, great open spaces, bringing old Europe to new possibilities. Curious entrepreneurs wait in Cree villages, cautiously thinking ahead, never imagining what would come of the simple exchange, a beaver pelt for a cast iron fry pan. Oh, Canada, I am a witness wrapped in pieces of the past, in remnants of a blanket patched together by thread, once tenuous and frayed, now strong enough to fasten an old shoe with a curled toe, left in the schoolyard, the ankle and calf of an invisible boy with tousled hair still twisted. Crushed bricks from the old school buildings make mortar, binding the sons and daughters of this great Canada. We aren't children anymore. We are growing ourselves up. We know our mamas and papas weren't perfect. They had their nasty side. No more games of pretend. Now we face it, we can change it. Oh, Canada, the alabaster path into the sun, once bearing the precious ointment to heal the healer, to anoint the anointed. I linger to draw the warmth into my skin. I step weightlessly. I get it, Canada. We don't have to be good guys to be good guys. Let's just get real. We can do this thing. Our sons and daughters expose naked truths and write new stories with new tunes. Oh, Canada, I am going to sing their songs of possibility.
Interrupt the conversation, but we've come to the end of our hour. So I love the enthusiasm of our audience here, and it's been so lovely to watch everyone knitting along. It's nice to see humans doing things, even if we're sitting in our living room here. Once again, I really want to thank Sylvia Olsen for joining us tonight, and to remind you that Sylvia's book, Unravelling Canada, A Knitting Odyssey, is available for sale now at Novel Idea or at your local bookseller. Just a note that our final event of 2021, the Local Flavor Sip and Savor fundraiser, is coming up on Saturday, December 11th. In that event, we are going to be joined by sommelier Ian Nichols of County Sips for a curated wine tasting and virtual tour of Prince Edward County, with a special appearance by Ulrika Bender, the author of Balancing Act, Growing Grapes and Making Wine in Prince Edward County. You can find more information about that at our website at kingstonwritersfest.ca/events. So thank you once again for your support of the festival. I really can't say it enough. After 2 seasons now without ticket sales, a substantial portion of our revenue stream has been cut. So your generosity is noted, appreciated, so important. And we thank you for contributing to the sustainability and viability of the festival on Giving Tuesday and year round. So with that, I thank you all. Stay safe.
Or can I just say one thing before I go?
Absolutely.
I'm a writer here as a writer, but the knitters always take over. They really do. But if you, sylviaolsen.ca, I think, is this random sort of website that I have. And for Nancy and Carolyn and other knitters that want to figure out what we're doing around Salish fusion, figure out, Nancy, if you want, sometime or another, we will give classes about this color work, just so you can figure it out. But you can stay in touch with me that way and talk knitting. And I'll maybe do, more of a knitting thing than a writing thing. Perhaps it's, one that you can hook up to.
And if you visit our website under the 2021 authors, you'll see Sylvia's profile there, and there is a link to her website there too.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful. Wonderful to be with you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia.
Bye-bye.